In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create a basic bump map in Photoshop using just an RGB source image. This is going to be a basic bump map tutorial. There's some more advanced things you can do for get a little bit better detail out of things, but this is a perfect approach for workflows where you may be under the gun, you're just using this texture once or twice, you don't really want to invest a lot of time in creating these bump maps. It's a very automated process. There's no manual masking or brushing or really involved approaches. I break this into just 3 steps. Create a black and white image, add some contrast, and then just refine it where you need to. So the first step's black and white. Pretty easy. I just add a black and white adjustment layer, and 9 times out of 10 the only 2 sliders you ever want to mess with are the red and the yellow. These other ones, I mean, you can mess with them. There's just not much color information for those different channels. Most images are just predominantly red or yellow tones. So what you want to do is you want to tweak it to where you get rid of as much of the mid-tone structure as you can without losing the darker structure, which in this case is for the grain. So I usually crank one of these all the way up and then sort of play with the other one. Sometimes you can get a little bit better result doing that, but it's usually pretty much the same. So we're going to go with the red just because it looks a little nicer. Okay, so step 2, we're going to duplicate that layer and we're going to use a curves adjustment. And we're going to just crank up that contrast. And we want to get things contrasted but not harsh. So I think that's pretty good. So let's collapse that down real quick. And the next step is we just want to refine this. So the issue that we want to refine out of here is that in this image, the grain is dark, and that's pretty easy to pick out, but in these lighter areas, there's some splotches. And that's going to show up in these bump maps, even though we don't want that to actually be textured. That's a cosmetic looking effect only. It's smooth, it's a different color, it's a different tone, but there's no actual texture there. So one approach, the bad way to do it, or I should say the frustrating way, is to, you can drop a solid white layer underneath this, create a mask, and then you just paint all these little things out. And I mean, for this image, it's hard to say, but I would guess it would take at least a week to do all that. So let's make it a point to not do it that way. If you're creating a bump map that you're going to use over and over and over again, you're going to be giving it to clients, you're going to be using it in large projects, other people are going to be using it, you might want to go that route. But for this case, I'm going to show you a quick trick that I use that can help out a lot, but it's still a pretty automated process. So what I've done here, first step, I've duplicated my previous layer. Now I'm going to go to my filter menu, blur, add a Gaussian blur effect, and you just want to play around a little bit. You want to blur it to where these dark areas start turning into like solid black blobs, but without blurring the edges too much. So this is a 4K image, and a value of about 2 pixels is good. So that looks nasty, right? Why do we do that? What we're going to do is set the blend mode of this layer to multiply, and let's see what that got us. So there's more contrast, that's for sure. So let's dig in here and see exactly what's going on. So let's look where the dark values in the grain start sort of breaking up and get some holes poked in them. This is going to sort of enlarge those dark areas, sort of take over some of the more mid-range values. But you can see it, we get this sort of burnt look on the edges. Things get a little bit blurry. It's starting to affect what the end structure is going to look like from our bump map. So, sorry, let me just show that again. Double click that layer, and that's going to pop up your layer style menu. What we're going to do now is we're going to change the blending modes here. And what you want to do is you want to hold Alt on your keyboard and click the top slider. And what this does is says for the white values of this layer, basically disappear them. And we want to show what's underneath. So this is going to get rid of these lighter sort of blurry values. You can see as we just sort of crank that up, they start disappearing. And you want to watch in here. Once the dark pixels start disappearing, that's when you've gone too far. So you just got to play around a little bit with it. And once you find your lower value, you can bring this top end down a little bit too, and it's really going to refine that. There you go. So with our Gaussian blur, we have, you can really see it over here too, where these grain streaks start breaking apart, and right there really adds a lot of that back in. Okay, so that is step 2. What is step 3, you might ask? So this is where you just play around with things, and you want to get more contrast in your dark tones and get rid of some of these mid-range things. Like that right there, that is, what is that even? You know, it's just some little dark tonal splotch that needs zero texture. So let's try to get rid of that kind of thing. So what we're going to do first is we're going to create a solid white layer under here, just like we would be doing if we were going to try to go through here and mask all that manually, which we're not. And we're going to do what we just did. No, I'm sorry. We're going to do one thing first. So let's add a curves layer here. Yeah, that thing is all split up now. So we want to increase the dark a little bit, not too much. We really want to just blow out those highlights. And that's what we get there. So we're going to collapse all that down. And what you can see is that we've really lost anything that's like not solid white or solid black. So that, you know, you really don't want to do that. If you're trying to create like a diffuse or a displacement texture, sometimes this is good for masking things out. But what this is going to do is just all these sort of grayscale values, it really softens things up. It makes it look more natural. So what you want to, this is where it becomes just a balance. You want to leave some of that in, but you also want to get rid of some of this junk in the middle. So it's never going to be perfect. It's always a balance of sacrificing one for the other. You just want to get it as good as you can. So that's, I think, probably pretty solid right there. Now, if you really want to, and again, you want to keep some of these grayscale areas to maintain a more natural look. But if you need to and you've got the room to do it, you can add another blur layer on top. And it's the same thing as before. Set it to multiply. Come back in. Just scrape off that top. And then you've got this really strong effect coming back on. And in this case, all this is really going to do is get rid of these nice little areas of tonal variation. Let's see if we can just actually helping a little bit, but it's just a little bit too much. Yeah, so that's probably good right there. So let us do that. So just to recap here, this is what we started out with. Our first step is to create a black and white layer. Second step, we used the curves. We created a bit more contrast. And then our third step was to just refine it. And you can see we just sort of pulled out a little bit of that middle range tones and spots. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But did it save us a lot of time? And will it be good enough? Probably.